In this video, I'm going to be finishing off my 1980 Sportster Ironhead project, and I'm going to start off by replacing the front brake switch as the original one is broken. After screwing in the new brake switch, all I have to do is attach these two wires, then attach the brake perch to the handlebars. Now the brake switch has been replaced, I'm going to go ahead and test it out. And as you can see, the brake switch is working. Now I'm going to move on to sanding down that brace we welded in place in the last video for the springer seat, so we can paint it just with a rattle can. Yes, I know the rattle can will upset a lot of people, but I'm not too fussed. As long as there's a lick of paint on there, it'll stop the frame from rusting. One thing that's an eyesore with the wiring on this bike is this positive wire that runs to your battery. I don't like how it's red, it sticks out like a sore thumb, so I'm just gonna put some black heat shrink over it, and I just want to leave about an inch of the red sheathing so you know that the red goes to the positive terminal on your battery. So off camera, I rerouted the wires to the rear tail light underneath that seat brace, and I also reinstalled the battery. So since owning this bike, there was always a leak coming from the primary drain bolt. And the reason why is because the previous owner was running a nylon washer and that wasn't sealing correctly. So I've gone to the Harley dealership and bought the correct rubber seal. Also, I've got a leak coming from the primary cover gasket and the gear selector shaft. So to fix a leaking gasket, obviously I've got to remove my primary cover, and whilst that's off, I'll also remove the gear selector shaft seal and replace it. So let's rip in. After scraping off the old gasket from the primary, now I'm going to move on to replacing the gear selector shaft seal. I'm just going to apply a little bit of grease on the inside of the seal so the gear selector shaft doesn't damage it when it goes on. And as you can see, previous owner has whacked a lot of silicone on that shaft and the casing there to prevent oil from coming out, because clearly misplaced that gasket. Alrighty, so we've just made a cork gasket to go in place, as I had a look online and all they use is a small gasket for here. Now to fill it with some 20W50. Once oil starts leaking out of the oil level drain bolt, you know there's sufficient oil in the primary, so now I'm just going to reinstall the bolt and the primary's all good to go. Now the primary's all back together, I'm going to whack on the springer seat and we can move on to starting the bike. Although I love the look of the springer seat, I've never really been a fan of how they mount, as it's a little tricky to get a wrench in between the springs to tighten down the nuts. Beautiful, seats all mounted. Now all I have to do is start the bike up and see if there's an oil leak. Great, flat battery. So after getting the bike nice and warm, there is no oil leaks coming from the sump drain bolt, gear selector seal, or the oil level drain bolt. So that primary case is nice and sealed. So now I've fixed those issues with the primary cover, I'm going to move on and change out these rabbit ear handlebars for the stock bars that I was originally running. There's a couple of reasons why. The main reason being this bike won't pass a blue slip with these handlebars as they're way too narrow, and another reason being the bike's actually pretty hard to turn with these handlebars as your elbows are faced in towards your torso and it doesn't give you a lot of leverage when turning the bike. So these bars have got to go. Now I'm going to move on to attaching the front brake line. Then I'll fill the reservoir with some new fluid and bleed the front brakes. Then after that, I'll move on to changing out my fork oil. So here is the drain bolt on the forks for the fork oil. I think the previous owner put too light a weight fork oil in these forks because the forks are way too soft and spongy. So I'm going to drain these forks and replace the oil with some 20 weight fork oil. There's definitely a better way to do this. Now at this stage, I understand this is not the correct way that you should be draining your fork oil, but I really couldn't be asked in taking the front wheel off, so I just held my front brake on and decompressed the front forks and drained out all the oil. And as you can see, it left an absolute mess. That was a pretty messy experiment. Again, I know this is not the correct way to do it. So the manual calls for 148 ml of 20 weight fork oil in each fork. After filling the forks with some new fluid, I'm now going to install some Prism Supply mirrors, which I bought quite a while ago for another bike, but I think they're going to fit this bike just well. After replacing the fork oil, I went for a ride around the backyard to test out the front suspension, and it was so much better. But what I did notice when I rode around the backyard was the bike was running extremely rough. So what I thought might be the case was I had an intake seal leak. So what my father-in-law is doing here is applying some brake cleaner to the seal to see if it stalls the bike. And what do you know? There is a leak in the intake seal. So got to remove the carburetor, then the manifold, and replace the manifold seals, and we should be good to go. So here's the original manifold seal, and as you can see, it's got a big nasty crack in the center of it, and that's what the intake was sucking that brake cleaner through and stalling out the bike. And now slip the old one on and see how loose it is. Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's practically the Ironhead project now finished. There's not much more that I can do to it except advertise it for sale. And that's exactly what I did a week after filming this footage, and I've since sold the Ironhead. I've had loads of fun with this project bike, from changing out the tins to rebuilding the carburetor, fixing the primary, mounting a Springer seat, relocating the horn, ditching the big bulky indicators and mirrors, along with swapping out the massive plastic speedo. I think I've transformed this bike into something that I'm pretty proud of. But the reason why I had to sell this bike was to fund my next project bike, and I've got two ideas to go with. Either a hardtail shovelhead chopper or a hardtail big twin Evo chopper. Haven't exactly made my mind up yet as to what one I'm going to go with, but drop a comment below and let me know what bike you'd like to see me build into a hardtail chopper, either a big twin Evo or a shovelhead. And that's all I've got time for in this one. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.